Howdy folks, today we are going to be talking about timers and intervals. Now, timers and intervals are really useful if you want something to happen with a delay or at a repeated distance, like maybe every 1 second you want something to happen. There's a lot of different uses for them, which is why we're going to go over them today. Let's get into it. So, our setup here, I have a basic HTML page, and then I have my script, okay? So let's say that I wanted to have a countdown timer. So first, I'm going to put a position for that. Countdown holder. And then let me hook that up in the script. Now let's start our seconds, right? Let's say we have seconds left equals 5. And I want to be able to count down those seconds and display that to the user. So what I could do is I could have a function display seconds left, and I could say holder dot inner text equals you have seconds left, seconds left. And then if I call display seconds left, this will display those seconds. Alright, so you can see you have 5 seconds left. Now that's not counting down. What if I want that to count down, right? If I want to count down, I have to actually set something up to every second count it down. The way I do that is with, well, there's two things. One, I could call setTimeout. Okay, now this takes a callback, and the callback gets run when the timer runs out, and then you give it a certain number of milliseconds. Basically, from the time this timeout starts, it waits that many milliseconds, and then it runs the code. So, for example, if I gave it 1,000 milliseconds, and then I said seconds left minus minus, and I call display seconds left again, I have to do that to update the HTML. Now I sit here, and after a second it goes down. Pretty cool. But it doesn't keep going down. Now the reason for that is setTimeout runs once. It will say, okay, I'm going to go a second, I'm going to run my code, and I'm done. Completely done. I'm not running anymore. I don't need to do anything. My work is done. If I want it to happen multiple times, I would use setInterval. Now setInterval keeps running. It goes a second, runs, second, runs, second, runs. And now you can see it continues counting down. And then it goes negative. So, and maybe at some point we don't want the interval to keep going. All right, so maybe after seconds left is 0. So if seconds left is less than or equal to 0, we want to stop the interval. How do we do that? Well, there is a function called clearInterval, but it requires an interval ID. Luckily, setInterval returns the ID, so I can say my interval equals setInterval. Then I can clear it by passing it into this function clearInterval, which only happens after the seconds get to 0. Run this again. It counts down. And it stops. It stopped, and now that interval is ended. So this is useful for a wide variety of things. If you actually want to do countdowns, that can be a thing. And then at this point, like maybe you say holder.innerText, time's up, or take some other action. Time's up. You could see that being useful for a number of things. So that's interval versus timeout. There's a couple of ways that you might want to use this for timeouts, for instance. One of them is, as the user is typing, we may want to call an API with what they're typing, but we kind of want to wait till they stop typing. So then every time they type, we reset a timeout. Let me show you what that would look like. Let's put in here t equals typing input, and then we'll give a div user content. Okay, we'll put both those in here. Typing input, get element by ID. You may have noticed I've mixed snake case and camel case here. You don't generally want to mix them, but you can pick whatever you want. User, what did I call that? User content, and sometimes I mix them, but if you're putting real code for production, you generally want to have one or the other. User content. Okay, so now I'm going to say, okay, when the user types .add event listener change, okay, event, and so what this is going to do is every time that the value of that input changes, it's going to fire this event. Okay, so I'm going to say user content dot inner text equals event dot target dot value. So now as I go here and I type, you can see the change event isn't actually firing every keystroke. So for that, I could actually change this to key up. And now you can see, as I type, this updates. But maybe I want to like wait and only do it when the user stopped typing for a couple seconds. This is really useful when you're doing something like a search API. Because if the user's typing a really long query, you don't want to be firing off that API for every single thing they type, because that's really wasteful. It's going to get them results that they don't want. What you want to do is you want to kind of type a little bit, like if I'm searching for the best Christmas pudding, maybe I stop typing, and that's when I want to do that search. So when I'm on Christmas, I don't want to search because I'm still typing. So what we would do for that is we can set a timeout. Okay? So what I'm going to say is, okay, set timeout. Oops. And this timeout actually handles the event change. So when this timeout goes off, and I'm going to set to maybe 2 seconds, then and only then is it actually going to make that search, which by this point is kind of indicated by setting that inner text. So here, if I go, you can see it catches up to me kind of quickly, but there was that 2 seconds delay. I misspelled it. You can see how that could be useful. The thing is, it kind of doesn't seem like it always waits, so it's better, but it's still happening before I stop. It's just delayed more. So what I want to do in that case is I'm going to make a variable, search timeout, and whenever I set that timeout, I'm going to set it here, but before I set it, I'm going to clear it. Clear timeout, search timeout. Now what that's going to do is, let's say I type C. It's going to set that timeout for 2 seconds. And then half a second later, I type H. It's going to clear the original timeout and set a new one, thus pushing back our window to 2 seconds again. So as long as you're typing, that window continuously is getting reset to 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds. But as soon as you stop typing, then it works. So I wait, and you can see 2 seconds later it shows up. 2 seconds seems kind of long. But that is one of the very common uses of set timeout. Another thing we use with set timeout is after the user's taken an action and you don't necessarily want the page to change immediately, because sometimes that can be a bad user experience. Sometimes you'll actually set a timeout and then wait maybe half a second and then change the page. But that's a timeout, just a normal timeout, without needing to clear it. So, today we have talked about how to use the interval, where an interval is something that repeats a certain block of code every predetermined time. You can clear an interval at certain points. To clear an interval, you have to actually set a variable equal to it. Reason I used a const there. Set a variable equal to it, and then that variable contains the ID of the interval, which you can use to clear it. Same thing with setTimeout. setTimeout is something that happens once, but you can use stuff like this where you have that variable and you set the timeout and clear it beforehand to kind of have a window that continuously moves as long as the user is doing something. Incidentally, this is how a lot of those automated timeouts work on websites, where they're saying, oh, as long as you're using it, you're fine, but if you don't use it for 20 minutes, we're going to log you out. They're doing something like this. There's a couple other things behind the scenes too, but this is how they do it on the front end. Anyway, I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you all next time.